Hi, everybody. Welcome to another Psalm devotional time. My name is Brandon Butts. I'm the high school pastor here at the chapel. So this summer, we are reading through the Psalms in 50 days. So excited. That comes out to about 3 Psalms per day. And one of the cool things about Psalms, or sometimes it's called the Psalter, is that it's actually broken down into about 5 books within the Psalms themselves. We are now finally on book 4, and that's what I want to talk about today. Now, what's funny is when at the church they asked, does any other pastor want to do a devotional time? Basically, I just figured out which one of the times was going to be Psalm 77, and then I said I'll sign up for that one because that is one of my favorite Psalms. Maybe though for a reason that you won't quite expect. So we're going to go through that today. And a big picture idea of each book and where each book is going and the themes behind it are super important. So you're going to want to look into that stuff too. But we're week 4 in, we're a few weeks in. I want to sit down and walk through with you how you can do a deep dive into a psalm. Basically what I did is I just did that this week, and I'm just going to kind of walk through with you what I did. And it is unbelievable how much truth and how much of God speaking to you you can get just from slowing down a second and reading through a psalm a couple of times and looking out for a couple of key pieces. So, like I said, we're in Psalm 77. As you're watching this video, you're going to want to take out your Bible, open up your app, and read along with this because you'll be able to pick out certain pieces. And then whether it's Psalm 77, Psalm 23, any of your other favorite Psalms that really strike you, you can do this same process throughout those. So let's go ahead and get started. One of the things that I love to do is, especially with the Psalms, just read the entire Psalm. You're going to pick out certain verses that are really going to speak to you, or you figure out, oh my gosh, that verse right there defines this whole Psalm. And we're going to get there with Psalm 77. I'll show you a couple verses that are some of my favorites. But one of the things that's really important with any Bible reading is context, right? Context. So you got Psalm 77 in front of you. And as you read it, go ahead and read it once and just kind of let it speak to you. If you have any questions or thoughts, you can kind of jot those down. In the Bible app, you can do some highlighting or maybe make a comment, different things. And I want you to pay attention to a couple of different things as you're reading through. Number one key indicator that really helps, and it's so funny, I mean, these are just normal grammatic tools that we can use. Just pay attention to really hard verbs, right? Verbs that are commit, remember, follow, things that really kind of indicate to you that, okay, I got to take some type of action here. Or in this case, the psalmist is taking some type of deep action, right? So that's one thing. You can pay attention to themes or repetition. If you see a word appearing multiple times, that's usually a hint. That's pretty important, right? And then another thing that you can pay attention to, especially with Psalms, right? What are we talking about? We're talking about songs and poems. And if you go back to your high school English class, right? There are patterns and there are things in poems and songs where you kind of see a story or you see flows from one section to the next. So I want to point out a couple things that I saw just digging into this psalm. And seriously, this was just opening up the psalm and just reading it a couple times and going through each one. So the first thing is right off the bat, you look at this psalm and you may think, oh, this is Brandon's favorite psalm because it's so happy and upbeat. Actually, the complete opposite. I mean, the first part of this psalm is all about despair, right? So you've got verses 1 through 4. You start off right out of the bat. I cry aloud to God. He's probably by himself, but he's crying out loud. Verse 4, this may be one of my favorite verses in all the Bible just because it shows why we have permission to speak to God. As we're going through these psalms, that is the main theme of the Summer Psalm series, permission to speak. I want you guys to listen to verse 4. You hold my eyelids open. This is the psalmist talking to God. He can't sleep. He's struggling. And he says, God, you're the one that is holding my eyes open to prevent me from sleeping. I am so troubled that I cannot even speak. Imagine that. And, psalmist, this guy wrote it hundreds of years ago, right? Probably a couple thousand years ago at this point. And yet we still struggle with the same things. How many times do we get to bed and we sit there with our eyes open because we can't think, we can't go to sleep? Maybe we're thinking too much, it's just running, and we feel like we are in despair just like this psalmist, right? So I think about that as I'm going through that. Now this is interesting. This is something that the psalmist does that maybe we can learn from because this is so hard. Once you get into verse 5, the psalmist slows down. How hard is this? From the moment we wake up to the moment we go to sleep, we've got an alarm on our phone, so we wake up to our phone, and then we're surfing the web and Instagram and Facebook moments before we go to sleep, right? If you're anything like me, it is impossible sometimes, it feels impossible to steal just a moment or two in the day to slow down and to reflect and think. But the psalmist does this, right? He says words like, I consider the days of old. Let me remember my song in the night. Let me meditate in my heart, right? You can't do this when you're running 100 miles an hour. So he does this, and he says, okay, I'm in despair. Let me meditate. Let me remember. Let me think on God and his works. And you think, oh, great, awesome. Now we're in the psalm, and he's just going to remember everything, and it's all going to be peachy keen, and okay, great. This is going to be a turning point. Not really, because here's the question, or here's the interesting thing, is that in his slowing down, the first thing that he jumps to is questioning God. So now he's telling God, after already telling him, you're the one holding my eyelids open, now he's just going to go ahead and list all the different things why he thinks God has completely abandoned him. Look at this. Do you guys realize this stuff is in the Bible? Will the Lord spurn forever and never again be favorable, right? Verse 9, has God forgotten to be gracious? How many times has that happened in your life where you feel that way, right? Has he in anger shut up his compassion? Did he just go away? Where did he go? I don't feel him. I don't feel like he's close, right? So talk about permission to speak. Once again, questioning God like this is not necessarily wrong. In the Psalms right here in Psalm 77, all of Psalms is an example of how we are to speak to God. You've heard this from Brandon Holler. Every other book in the Bible is about God speaking to us. Senior Pastor Brandon Holler has reminded us that Psalms is reserved as an example of how we have permission to speak to God, right? So basically, if you could summarize up this whole point so far within Psalm 77, I'm going to kind of steal yet another pastor's thunder here. Remember at the beginning of the year, if you were here, Pastor Newman Crook explained in his message, it's okay not to be okay. It's the first part, right? But if you guys remember, and if you don't, I'm going to tell you, what's the second piece of Newman's takeaway, right? First piece is it's okay not to be okay. The second piece, it's not okay to stay that way. So what's the psalmist going to do? Is he going to stay that way? Or is he going to do something different? This is the final shift in the psalm, right? If you're reading through it, you see these shifts in mode and tone, and you say, okay, we're going into a different direction here. Look at this. I love this. Verse 10, he switches one more time. Then I said, I will appeal to this. Okay, so let's just do one more recap, right? Beginning. Despair. I'm crying aloud to God. I can't sleep. God's holding my eyelids open. Number 2, let me slow down. Let me remember. Let me meditate. Movement 3. Wait a second. When I meditate and remember here, all I can think about is, God, where are you? That's where he's at right now. And then he says, okay, but I am going to appeal to this. Verses 11 and 12 are critical to the rest of this psalm, right? If you want to zone in on 2 different verses in Psalm 77, these are the 2 to do it on. Remember I talked about repetition and when you can see words that are coming up again? He remembered and meditated earlier on, this psalmist. Now he's going to do it again, but notice how he does it. I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your wonders of old. I will ponder all your work and meditate on your mighty deeds. Aha, so now he's remembering and meditating, but he's remembering and meditating on something very specific. One other thing that our pastors have taught us here at the chapel, Mark Gagline a couple of weeks ago gave a message talking about different ways that you can jump in to the Bible, right? And he suggested having a couple of different go-to translations as you're reading through the Bible. So just if you want to know, what I've been reading through so far is ESV, English Standard Version. That's probably one of my favorites. But I also like two others because if you get these three different translations, you get kind of three different looks. In fact, one of them is not even a translation, it's a paraphrase. You get a look into different ways in which this is being expressed, right, and translated. NIV is amazing. Listen to what 11 and 12 in the NIV sounds like, right? I will remember the deeds of old. Yes, I will remember your miracles of long ago. I love how the NIV translates that one word instead of wonders, miracles. They kind of mean the same thing, but I don't know about you. When I hear miracle, I think, oh my gosh, this is a supernatural thing that only God can do, right? Unbelievable. So that's a really great way to get a deeper insight into this psalm is look at a different translation, right? And then throughout the rest of this psalm, verses 13 through 20, the psalmist remembers to him and to the ancient Israelites, because this is an Old Testament psalm, right? He remembers the greatest redemption event that they had seen up to that point, which was when the Israelites were slaves in Egypt, right? Everybody's seen these movies and all these different movies that talk about this, right? And that's a big part of the Old Testament. The Exodus from Egypt, where God saved his people and brought them to the promised land with tons of miraculous deeds, right? Including plagues and all kinds of other different things, parting the Red Sea, right? All of these amazing, incredible miracles that he remembers. Now, if we move into what we want to take away from this after reading through this whole thing, it's important to reflect back and realize, okay, it's okay not to be okay, but it's not okay to stay that way, and he doesn't. If you look at a psalmist's lament journey throughout the Psalms, one thing that is critically important is even if you have permission to speak at the beginning, which you do, God, you open my eyelids, I cry aloud to you. At some point, there's a turning where the psalmist says, I am going to make the choice to remember and trust in what God has done for me. And the amazing thing about us now is that we can look back after Jesus and look at one of the most important redemptive acts in all of history. In fact, it's the most important one. And that is the miracle of Jesus dying and being raised again so that we can be washed clean of our sins, right? So that's just one of the many things that you can remember and look back on when you are feeling down and when you are struggling, right? So here's one of the things, one last takeaway before we close this out. I want you to think about this. So, okay, we've read through the psalm. We've looked at some of the main themes. We've looked at how it moves from movement to movement. What do I do with this? How, when I am struggling, when I'm lamenting, when I can't sleep, how is this supposed to help me, right? And I think looking at just one more translation, or in this case, paraphrase, really helps us with this, right? If you turn to the Message version of these verses, specifically chapter 77, verses 11 through 12, you'll see it explained this way, right? At the end, it says, I'll ponder all the things you've accomplished and give a long, loving look at your acts, right? And this is the psalmist talking to God. So one of the things that has helped me unbelievably as a person who personally struggles with anxiety and really appreciates the Psalms and the ability to cry out to God, but then also to receive peace and healing from them as well, is sometimes I just keep a journal and I have to write down, okay, God, in my life, you have done this for me. God, in my life, you have done this for me. God, in my life, you have done this for me. And like we talked about earlier, if nothing else, you can write down one thing in your journal forever and the rest of time, and that is, God, your most miraculous deed was sending your Son, Jesus Christ, to die for us and then be raised again so that we can be saved. It's the most amazing, amazing thing that can help us remember in the midst of our pain, in the midst of all of the suffering, in the midst of the sleepless nights. It's not going to immediately go away, but it's going to help us to remember God has sent his Son to save us. Now, if you have not dug into the reading series that we're doing through the Psalms, I mentioned we're doing about 3 Psalms a day, don't worry. Maybe this is the first video that you've watched so far. Start with today. Start with today and join us on this journey through Psalms as we enjoy these Psalms together the rest of this summer.